Welcome to the Possibility Hub video series. I'm Carol Talbot, the creator and founder of the Possibility Hub, an advocate for awakening, encouragement, and creating opportunities for an expansion of awareness and consciousness. In this episode, I'm in conversation with Matthew Ryan, the developer of an energetic healing modality called gamma wave healing. And we're talking about frequency modulation and manipulation, and more importantly, what you can do to protect yourself. Hello, Matthew. Good to see you again, and excited to hear what you have to say about our topics today, which are around frequency modulation and nanotechnology. And I know you've shared with me that frequency modulation is something that's coming up a lot when you work with clients. You're seeing shifts and things there. And I know from people that I'm working with and around, they're certainly feeling very out of sorts. So let's start with frequency modulation and what you're noticing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on again, Carol. It's always a pleasure to have these discussions. Yes, in thinking about the topic for this week to talk about, there's a couple of things that come up quite a bit in my sessions. As you mentioned, frequency modulation and nanotech. With the frequency modulation, this I know that is a term that's kind of out there. I was given this term in sessions after observing certain things in people's energy field, and I'd be asking, what is this? What am I seeing? And I was being told this is frequency modulation. So, being able to identify that there are sources of frequency, sources of energy that are kind of constantly being broadcast in various ways, and that these frequencies then interact with our energy field, or they interact with our DNA, they interact with our body, and create changes. From my perspective of the work that I'm doing, these changes would be distortions that would be showing up in someone's field that need to be balanced or corrected. And with the frequency modulation, this is something that has been increasing over the last several years, and I think it's really at a fever pitch now. So just to kind of define what I mean by that when I'm speaking about frequency modulation is that there are signals that are broadcast actively. There are signals that are kind of passively embedded into other types of signals that are in our environment, and that these embedded signals are, which I call frequency modulation, are intended to create changes, right? And so, an example of this would be, let's say, the cell phone towers. So in the cell phone towers that are placed all around the world, really pretty much most corners of the world, other than, deep, dark places in the Amazon or in the Congo or whatever, everywhere where there are people, pretty much there in large groups, there are cell phone towers in our world now. And then we've also got, in the developed world, we got the 5G that is being rolled out, that is building upon this. Well, in these different types of towers that are being used to broadcast the signals, relay the signals for our cell phone communication and internet, there also are other signals that are being broadcast, and these signals are of like a different spectrum of frequency than where the telecommunications devices are operating. And these signals, they can be very high frequencies, they can be very low frequencies, but they're carrying information, or they're carrying discordant frequencies that when they interact with the human energy field, or they interact with our DNA, they create these modifications, or they create distortions. So when I'm seeing this show up in people's energy field, there can be a whole range of manifestation, from implants, like an actual energetic implant that will be implanted into the energy field, or even implanted onto the DNA. And what ends up happening then is that as these these distortions express themselves through the person's, you know, life, through their energy field, you may end up with certain things, certain types of physical manifestations, certain types of like illness, you know, that would be manifesting certain types of physiological responses, like ringing in the ears, which, you know, not tinnitus due to like loud sound exposure that would harm the physical structure of the ears. These are other frequencies. You know, many people that I talk to hear this. Just as an example, there, myself included. I mean, I have literally had since I think it was the beginning of 2018. It might have even been earlier in 2017. I forget the exact date, but I woke up one day, and on that day, a ringing started in my left ear that was tritoned. It had three tones, three very specific frequencies. I can hear it right now, you know, and it's been 24 hours a day. And sometimes in the right ear, about 20% of the time, there'll be a ringing in the right ear. And, you know, this is, you know, likely a result of this kind of frequency modulation, where whatever is the signal that is being broadcast, I don't know the source of it, whether, you know, it's cell phone towers or the Wi-Fi routers or whatever it is, but there is a signal that is acting upon you know, the energy body and the physicality, in this case, that there's a translated frequency of hearing a ringing. So you know, there are many different things, and when we get into the distortions, you know, like on the DNA, let's say, those things, when we're working with people to clear those types of distortions, clearing those implants out of the DNA, you can then return the human DNA, you know, back into something that's following, you know, the core original blueprint that was intended, and these modifications then can stop. So you know, there may be, like with the ringing in the ears, there are other you know, aspects of this as well that maybe relate more to like phase shift, change in frequency. But yeah, there are many different things that are happening right now, and especially as we observe these frequencies coming through things like social media. You know, this is maybe something that many of your listeners would be noticing. I definitely did. This is why I really stopped participating on Facebook last year, in June of last year. You can feel it. You can see the way that the polarization is being driven. You can see the way that people are regurgitating propaganda without any open availability to consider other types of information. It's just like rejected out of hand. These frequencies are coming through the social media, whether it be through you know, maybe subtle visual cues, you know, that would be coming through that when you're looking at your screen. Maybe it's coming through in another way that we don't currently understand, but there's absolutely frequency modulation going on that is driving this division and driving the really the mind control programming that is going on right now across our world.
Well, interesting that you talk about ringing in the ears, because I know over the last probably year and a half, I also at very odd times get a ringing in the ear that actually almost makes me stop and think, and to the point where I do my best to notice what triggered it. And I still haven't been able to pinpoint that, and not to a point where it's a problem. And yet I've also come across a lot of other people who have had it where the ringing in the ears is a problem to them. And there's two modes of thinking. You know, we talked a couple of weeks ago about the solar flares and the activities and how they're impacting us in terms of our frequency, and you know, that many people are awakening and becoming more aware. So I know people say, oh, maybe it's a kind of like wake up call, because it certainly brings you back into the present like nothing else.
Absolutely.
Or, as you say, it could be a frequency modulation in terms of mind control. So how do you discern the good, the bad, and the ugly?
Well, that's a really good question, because there, you know, with the ringing in the ears, let's say with I've read before, and I've been told by my guides that this it can be accurate, that when you get these like ringings in your left ear, could be related to like negative types of negative frequency, and in the right ear, a lot of people often attribute that to guidance, receiving, you know, corroborations, if you will, from your spiritual guides, from your angelic beings. So there, it can be tricky trying to discern those types of things. But in general, my mode that I use, or kind of modality that I use in attempting to discern between two types of frequency, is that I go into the solar plexus. Okay, so our solar plexus chakra has this expression of itself. So like the other chakra systems, or the other chakra centers, that would be balls of light or discs of light that would be kind of suspended vertically through the body. The solar plexus has this expression where it will express itself kind of off of the surface of your physical body as like a little energetic disc. And this disc can move vertically through your field based on a frequency that it's experiencing and then translating to you. So what I mean by this is to say, okay, develop your basis for your emotional guidance system here by identifying a memory that is an extremely positive memory. Like I could say, like the moment that my two children were born, right? Like that would maybe be like one of the peak experiences of my life in a positive way. And when I go into that, the emotion, the energy in that solar plexus rises, it like uplifts and it expands, right? And then if you identify another one, like let's say when I tore my ACL in my knee, that was a very bad moment. And that was like a low feeling, like there was a lot of dread, and that, the sinking feeling deep into your body where you're like, oh God, that doesn't feel good. That if you identify that system, then, you can measure that baseline whenever you encounter any kind of a frequency that's interacting with your field, whether it be frequency modulation, whether it be meeting somebody, having a conversation with somebody. If you can identify then where the response is on that solar plexus, the feeling center, if what you're encountering, and it like drops that feeling, it drops you into those lower energies of like, worry, anxiety, regret, dread, hate, anger, like those types of things, that might be a lower frequency then that is encountering your field. Whereas if it actually produces like a neutral feeling or an upliftment, everything feels expansive, I would use that then to identify, okay, maybe this is a positive situation, even if I don't understand what it is.
So again, all of those things are asking people to have a higher degree of awareness and tapping into their own sense of knowing. It's also funny and strange that you mention the solar plexus as almost like the seat of wisdom, because actually there's a book, I think it came out in the early 1900s by a guy called Theron Dumont, if I'm not mistaken. And you can probably get it on the internet for free, a bit like the Time of the Master Key by Charles F. Harnell. There are a lot of those, not a lot, but there were a few really good wise people around at that time. And he rates the solar plexus as really the seat which we need to be paying attention to. Whereas many people dismiss that energy center, that power center, and focus on the heart. I certainly don't as well.
Yeah.
And it's a bridge chakra as well. Now,
Sure.
when you're seeing clients and you're seeing that maybe there's some frequency modulation, have you seen any correlation between maybe people who are in cities, very crowded, polluted cities, as opposed to people who are living sort of more in nature? Have you seen any shift there or difference?
Yes, I have. I would say, to be fair, the majority of my clients are living in kind of larger population areas than super rural, but I do have a number of clients that live in very rural areas around the world. And what is pretty typical when we do the initial check-in on somebody during the healing session, when we go through to do the initial clearing on their field, people that tend that live in like higher density population centers tend to have more noise in their field. So as I check in and I'm observing their field, it kind of visually looks to me like fuzz or like static electricity that's like crackling, on the outside of their aura. And people that, that are living in an urban environment. Like I had a first-time client the other day that lives in a city and lives in Canada. And this person, I had never worked with this person before, and they did not have any kind of like a shielding healing technique. And when I went to go clear their field, this noise was thick. It was really, really thick on their field, and it took a little bit extra time to clear it. But that's just something that is being passively received by us by kind of walking around in this soup of EMF, the electromagnetic frequencies that are, if you turn on your Bluetooth or your Wi-Fi and you live in a city, it's gonna get populated with like 30 different sources of Wi-Fi that'll show up for your phone, and that's telling you that there are so many signals that we are inundated with. And I believe, based on what I'm observing, with clients, is that fuzz, that EMF, this frequency modulation, especially if it's targeted for some effect, it's creating this weight upon people that is exacerbating all of the normal stresses and challenges that we as a civilization are going through right now.
And you also mentioned about these frequency modulations impacting our thoughts or mind control. And I was reading some books on the archons and mind
Yes.
and thought inserts. And what I've also noticed is that certain people who have a certain way of thinking and have certain opinions about certain issues find themselves suddenly doing things totally against what they had thought last week. And it's like, for what reason am I doing this?
Absolutely.
So are there thought inserts going on through all these, as you say, I love the metaphor of we're walking around in a soup, which is so sad because, when we're a pure vessel, we're emanating light, so much light that it, can light up a whole building and take the space of a whole building. So can you imagine when you're walking in that space, you're impacting hundreds of people around you when you're clear. And when you're not, when you're in this fog wading through this, you're literally unconsciously being bombarded with these frequency modulations, with these EMFs, with these thoughts and thought patterns, so that, as I mentioned, people are finding themselves doing things and thinking, why am I doing this? What happened? Have you come across that?
Absolutely. Yes. I think that that's a really good question and a really good point, because I think that this is an effect that we are observing right now, whether we are aware that we're observing it or not. There is massive energy moving towards what we would call mind control right now, all across the world. I'm in the United States. I have clients spread all around the world in different countries, whether they're developed or Western countries or undeveloped countries, even people that live pretty remotely in different places. But there is a really massive and obviously concerted effort right now to shape the thought form that humanity has. And I really like your connection in with the archons, because I would say if we track the intentionality that is behind this frequency modulation, it is nefarious. If your alignment is with a whole and complete and sovereign human being, then this agenda is nefarious for sure. And when you track it upwards, the frequency, the energy that is behind it feels very much like that archontic frequency, or like the reptilian frequencies. And so what I would believe then is that those groups, this control structure that is behind the scenes in the shadows running this planet, or has been running this planet until very recently, they are emulating this type of intention, and they are using technology that can literally broadcast thought forms into, or at least they're translated by the human consciousness as thought forms. Maybe some of your listeners are familiar with there is a type of technology that's referred to as voice of God technology. And this technology was, I believe where I first heard about it, it was like declassified information that came out of the first Gulf War in 1991. And what happened when the United States and coalition army moved across the border into Kuwait, and then into Iraq, they were broadcasting this then classified technology that broadcast to the Iraqi soldiers that it was the voice of Allah telling them to lay down their arms. And there were, and they had like, they may have had like visionary experience, but they definitely had auditory experience, and soldiers surrendered. So when the coalition forces moved into Iraq, they met very little resistance. And this has come out, you know, now 20 something years later, that there was a technology that was employed that facilitated this. Well, what I believe now, you know, what we have now is way more sophisticated than what we had. You know, that technology was probably based on, you know, 1970s or 1980s technologies that was employed then. So it's very sophisticated, it's very subtle, and we have to be extremely clear and discerning within our own field to become aware of when thoughts are rising within our field, to notice them and say, wait a second, do I actually believe that? Is this actually true? What if that's not true and I don't believe this about myself, where's this thought rising from? And you know, there can be other sources too, like parasitic infiltration in the body, but you know, what I'm seeing most of with people is related to the frequency modulation. And if it's not direct thoughts that are being broadcast in and heard within your inner monologue, it would be frequencies that come in then that trigger, or perhaps you know, give rise to certain repetitive unconscious thought patterns that can be directed. So it's a very interesting and very you know, kind of sketchy situation that we are involved in.
When we go into the thoughts, I mean, there's the age-old question: where do your thoughts come from, and are we actually has the mind of the archons been inserted in ours, that it's not our own mind, and that we have been conditioned from such an early age through school to do as we're told, to think in specific ways. You know, we think TV and radio is entertainment. It is not. It is entrainment, for sure.
Yes.
You know, that makes you, you know, when you are able to find that stillness, and many people are not. And many people, you know, I often, when I go around to see people, I find they have to have noise on all the time. They have to have a television on, even if they're not watching it, or music or something on the whole time. And of course, we have this. We go to shopping malls. The mall itself has music. You go into every shop and it's loud music. You go to a bar, there's a band, there's noise everywhere, which keeps the noise in our head, which means that then we crave the noise. We end up, you know, addicted. We need to sort of look onto our phone or a device to keep, you know, the busyness in there, instead of finding that, you know, silence, that stillness. And then when you find that stillness and silence, well, what do you do with it? We literally are bombarded.
Yes, absolutely. I think that is, you know, potentially by design, right? You know, that they're with a lot of these frequencies. Well, I'm trying to be fair. It's, you know, it's nice when you walk through the shopping mall and you hear a little bit of, you know, of a little bit of background music, but when you're looking at it again, kind of like this EMF soup that is present in the environment that is constantly being broadcast, it does create distortion within our field. It's discordant frequencies, and the way that the human attention focuses, it will tend to kind of, you know, screen those informations and energies out of our experience. And so the conscious mind isn't even following what's going on in the background, yet in the background then these frequencies are potentially uploading things into your field if you're in this discordant energetic state. So whether that be advertising. Frequency modulation exists in advertising. It's not just a frequency that's broadcast as a sound or like a sub-audible sound. It can be more of an energy that is, is being broadcast through a visual stimulation, like, advertising, looking at billboards where there is predictive programming that's embedded in there as frequency modulation. So, we are made susceptible to that type of expression, and that can really create a lot of distortion within our field.
So what do you make of some of those EMF necklaces, bracelets, technology, which is said to protect? I mean, do you utilize those, or are you running your own protection methods and sharing those protection methods with your clients?
Yes, absolutely. All of that. I do use a number of techniques to help shield me from EMF and from the frequency modulation. There is an energetic shield expression for our energetic field, our aura, that can be switched back on. This is something that every one of my clients for the last couple of years, I've been instructed with every client. On the first session, we go through, do a clearing, and then we activate this energetic shield. And this energetic shield is a natural expression of the human aura that was essentially switched off a very long time ago when our DNA was being modified by outside forces. When we turn this back on, it can protect us from the frequency modulation. It can protect us from these types of EMF. I'm not saying it blocks all of it, but it is very, very effective at supporting that. In addition to that, there are things like my organite. Like I have an organite pendant right next to me, and organite is a type of kind of man-made crystal, combination of crystals and resin, and often incorporating either shungite or black tourmaline, which are shown to block EMF. And so when you wear a piece of organite, it creates a field around you, probably a toroidal field, and that shungite can help then protect you from EMF that is coming into your field. Selenite crystal is very effective as well. It's made out of gypsum, which does block EMF, but I have selenite towers that are all over in my my healing space.
Well. Yes, I have a
So
number of towers and organites as well. So
yeah, so those are great methods. I know there's technology, like I have a little chip that's on the back of my phone that was designed in Germany, which evidently blocks EMF. It'll block EMF emission off of the phone. There are many different things out there, and as people are paying more attention and people are really exploring their creativity, there are many other things that are coming forward that can help. And my understanding is that many of these are very effective at assisting us. But for my day-to-day living, the shield activation that I utilize is probably the thing that provides me with the most protection.
yes, and I too have my own protection methods in addition to the selenite towers, the organites, and certain other things that I wear. Now, how does frequency modulation and what we've been talking about links very much with the nanotechnology as well, that's people are becoming aware of. I'm not saying it's new, because it's not, but more and more people are becoming aware of it.
Yes. So nanotechnology is a kind of an umbrella term for a type of technology that's been in development for several decades, as far as I'm aware. What it refers to is any type of a material that can be reduced in its state of existence down to a very, very, very small individual particle. And these are in a nanometer or nanometer measurement, which is basically 1 meter, 3 feet roughly for people that use the English system, but 1 meter in length divided into 1 billion equal parts. So, I mean, even to take 1 meter and divide it into thousandths, that's a very, very small, very small. But then to go beyond that, to go 1,000,000 times smaller than 1,000th of a meter is an incredibly small thing. We need like electron scanning microscopes in order to be able to see this type of thing. We're talking about the size of like a virus, And so the nanotechnology is typically, but based on observation of what has been put into our environment via the chemtrails primarily, that these materials tend to be either metallic or, in my experience, they tend to be polymer. So there's like the nanometallic pieces would be like aluminum, barium, strontium, other types of heavy metal. And then the nanopolymers are a polymer. It's kind of, they look like little fiber optics. When they manifest as large things that are naked eye visible, they look like little fiber optic strands, like little hairs. And so the nanotechnology, it does an enormous amount of things potentially, but it tends to be totally tied into the frequency modulation. And so what I mean by that is, like, if we can imagine, you know, there was a really excellent movie that came out of the it's an animated movie that came out of the Walt Disney Studios a couple of years ago called Big Hero 6. And in Big Hero 6, you know, the young boy, he's like an inventor, and he invents this little thing. He calls him a nanobot, and it's like a little, you know, a three-piece, like a little ball and two little cones that form a metallic little piece. And he's designed this way that they can combine to each other and form larger structures based on a signal that he's broadcasting. This is exactly the metaphor of what really is going on with nanotechnology, except the scale is way smaller. So what ends up happening is that everybody is exposed to this nanotechnology. It's a broadcast through the chemtrails when those are being sprayed, pharmaceuticals, food additives. It's prevalent within our societies. And so if the nanotechnology is inside the bodies at this infinitesimally small scale, there will be signals that are being broadcast, broad spectrum signals that is the frequency modulation. And it contains instructions that basically give the instructions to the nanotech how to combine. So maybe it's just a polarization at one signal where they begin going positive and negative, and they're connecting. And then those then end up connecting into other pieces that are connecting. And then they begin forming structures. And then, with like patterns of energy, as they're following these sets of instructions on the frequency modulation, they form more and more and more complex structures. And then suddenly we have structures that are inside of our body that are essentially designed or engineered to create different types of distortion, or to modify the functionality within our body, to create interference for our consciousness, to create harm, potentially even. There are many different things. And so I think that these two types of technology are intimately connected, and not necessarily for our benefit.
I think it just reiterates and stresses how important the work that you do and so many other people do in the world to help people clear their energy field, to detox the system, to advocate, a healthy mind, healthy body, healthy energy field, and to start thinking a little bit more about what sits with you well, what doesn't, what you believe, what you don't believe, and really start protecting yourself in a new way, that the old methods are not working. And it really does, to me, mean I really don't want to be living in a high-rise city, getting out of town on a regular basis, and getting into more rural areas where you're not going to be bombarded, stepping away from the phone, from your technology and all sorts of things, is a real, not a nice to do, it's a must to do.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate in where I live, that I live in a mostly rural area. It's a small city. It's a large town, maybe, 10 to 20,000 people in the area. But even still, there is still frequency modulation that's here. But you're exactly right, because at one point, my family and I, we lived up in the mountains in an area where the power lines and the phone lines were buried. So there was nothing above ground that was creating any level of EMF. The closest cell phone tower was several miles away. And when we moved from the center of town into that rural area, and it was an immediately noticeable effect of dropping the EMF. There was no noise, and we wouldn't have necessarily even noticed that if we hadn't had the contrast. You know, if we hadn't come out of that soup of EMF and then into a pristine environment, that it was a very noticeable drop. And so, you know, I'm grateful for my opportunity to be living here, and yet there's even still is here, there is frequency modulation, absolutely, that is affecting everybody. But yeah, as much as can be possible, I always am recommending to people when we're wrapping up in our sessions and I'm being told guidance for them to help them to integrate, it's go to the river, you know, go to the beach, go into the woods, like take a walk in the woods, you know, go for a hike, lay out in the sun and like sunbathe, you know, connecting in with those natural environments, connecting in with the natural harmonic frequencies of this world can help to help you to clear and release, you know, that fuzzy distortion out of our field. It can help us to recalibrate, so that we're not being entrained, as you mentioned, into these dominant broadcast frequencies, and instead we're able to maintain our own dominant resonant frequency.
Well, maybe we don't have forests here in United Arab Emirates, but we do have the desert. And I must say, even though it's still hot at the moment, I go out into the desert at least once a week. And honestly,
Wonderful.
the silence, the stillness, it's so powerful. And even though I go with a friend, we are so happy just to sit there. And instead of bathing in that soup of being bombarded with frequency modulations, we're bathing in silence, in stillness, and of course the beautiful sand beneath our feet. So, you know, coming from the UK, it's easy when you've got the sort of the green and the forest, and it's so rich, the green back in England, and it's very different here. Yet the desert does have its own beauty and its own magic.
Absolutely.
So, Matthew, what a very
Absolutely
interesting topic we've covered today to hopefully help people think a little bit more about the soup that they're living in. And we also gave some recommendations in terms of those selenites, organites, and other things that, and shungite, that will, you know, keep those at bay to a certain extent, while you also come up with your own practices to maintain your clearness. And I would also remind people to notice the difference when they are in a city and when they get out of town. Like you said, when you as a family went up into the mountains and there was a noticeable difference. There really is in how you feel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
so thank
absolutely.
you.
Yeah.
Any other last thoughts before we finish off today?
Well, yeah, I would just say that, you know, based on what I've been seeing with the people that I'm working with around the world, and based on what I'm seeing energetically and the information that I receive, we're moving through a moment right now, you know, in this moment of whatever it is, September 9th, 2021, where things are going to intensify a little bit. And a big part of that is going to involve this frequency modulation. So, you know, put down the phone, you know, take a break from Facebook or Instagram or, you know, Twitter or whatever social media engagements maybe that you have, and really be committed to finding that centered place, because that really is the way for us then to be able to stand in our sovereignty in spite of all of this type of influence that's being applied to us at this time.
Definitely a time to find your sovereignty. Thank you, and I will speak with you again next week. Have a fabulous weekend, whatever you're up to.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carol.